Hi, this is Miss Goodman, and I'm going to demonstrate solving equations which have fractions using the method that's shown on page 706 in your course text, examples 8 and 9. But for these examples, I'm going to use 3 student questions from the first journal entry. This is the first question. 1/2 times x plus 2 plus 1/8 times x minus 8 is equal to x plus 3. It's important to understand here that we have terms here, which are groups of factors separated by plus and minus signs. So this is our first term. This is our second term. These are separated from each other by this plus sign here. And this is another term, and this is another term. And according to the method I'm going to use, in order to clear the fractions before we solve the equation, we need to find the lowest common denominator and then multiply each of those terms by that lowest common denominator, and that will clear the fractions. That's one way of simplifying an equation, is to clear the fractions. Then we would combine like terms or remove the parentheses by distributing. That's another way of simplifying. And combine like terms. That's a third way of simplifying the equation. And we always want to simplify the equation before we solve it. So here, finding the lowest common denominator is relatively easy. The lowest common denominator is the same as the lowest common multiple. It is that number which all the denominators go into evenly. Now, in this case, 8 is the lowest common denominator because 2 goes into 8 4 times, and that's a whole number. And 8 goes into itself one whole time. So 8 is our lowest common denominator. LCD we can write is 8. Now, using this method for clearing fractions, we multiply each term by that lowest common denominator. So I'm going to multiply this term by 8 and this term by 8 and this term by 8 and finally the last term here by 8. Then I clear the fractions, and you can use cancellation. 2 goes into itself once and into 8 4 times. 8 goes into itself once, 8 goes into itself once, so those just cancel. 8 over 8 is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. And so over here we're left with 4 times x plus 2, fraction gone, plus x minus 8 equals 8x plus 24. All the fractions have been cleared. Why does this work? Let's stop and think about this for a minute. Lowest common denominator is that number that all the denominators go into evenly. So if we're multiplying here on the top by the lowest common denominator, all the denominators on the bottom are going to go into it evenly, meaning we're going to get a whole number. We're going to clear the fractions. So to simplify further now, we're going to distribute 4 times x and 4 times 2. It's called using the distributive property. 4 times x is 4x. 4 times 2 is 8. And this is just 1 times x and 1 times minus 8. You can simply drop the parentheses. 1 is an identity for multiplication that doesn't change anything. And over here we have 8x plus 24. One final thing we can do to simplify the left-hand side is to combine the like terms. The like terms here are 4x and x, 4x and x, and 8 and minus 8. But 8 and minus 8 are opposites. 8 minus 8 is 0, so we can just cancel those out. And 4x plus 1x is 5x, and that's equal to 8x plus 24. So now we have a simplified equation, and we're ready to solve it. To solve this equation, we want to bring the x terms to one side and the numbers to the other. It would be less steps if we brought the 8x to the left-hand side. And to do that, we have to undo plus 8x. So we're going to apply the addition property of equality. We always apply the addition property of equality before the multiplication property of equality. So we're going to subtract that 8x from here. And by the addition property of equality, whatever we do on the right side, whatever we add or subtract on the right side, we have to do the same thing to the other side, the left side. So now here on the left side we have 5x minus 8x is minus 3x. Over here the 8x's go away, 8x minus 8x is 0, and 24 plus 0 is 0 here, right? 24 plus 0 is 24. Now we have what's called a basic equation with one term on either side. To undo x times minus 3 or minus 3 times x, we have to do the opposite of times minus 3. We divide by minus 3. Not add 3, that's a common error. We divide by minus 3. That's the opposite of multiply by minus 3. And minus 3 over minus 3 is 1, and 1 times x is x. So that gets x alone. But because we multiplied the left side by minus 3 by the multiplication property of equality, we have to also multiply the right side, divide the right side by minus 3. We have to divide both sides by minus 3. So we get x is equal to 24 divided by minus 3 is minus 8. And that's our solution. We found x by getting x alone on one side of the equation, and this reads x is minus 8. So, to summarize, first we found a lowest common denominator. We multiplied each term of the original equation by that lowest common denominator. That cleared the fractions. Then we distributed, then we combined like terms. Once we had a simplified equation, we solved the equation for x using first the addition property of equality and finally the multiplication property of equality. Finding the lowest common denominator in this equation is a little trickier. Some of you may see it right away, but if you don't see it right away, here is a kind of a trick you can use, a method, a sure method. Take each of your denominators and prime factorize them. Okay, 2 is a prime factor because only 1 and itself go into 2. Only 2 goes into 2 and only 1 goes into 2. 2 doesn't break down any further than 2 times 1, in other words. 4, on the other hand, was composite because 2 times 2 is 4 and 1 times 4 is 4. So you have more factors than just 1 and 4. That makes it a composite number. But 2 has only factors of 1 and 2, so it's prime. And you want to take each of the denominators and break them down into prime factors. Now 5 is already prime. 5 is already prime, just like 2, because only 1 times 5 is 5. 10 breaks down into 5 times 2. These are prime. And 12 breaks down into, for example, 4 times 3. But 4 is not prime yet. 3 is. 4 is not prime, so we break it down some more. And now we have all prime factors. Then we think, okay, in my list of prime factors here, I have 2, 3, and 5. Now, 2 appears twice here, no times here, once here, and twice here. The most number of times that it appears in any one of these 4 factorizations is twice. So we write it twice. 3 just appears once over here. So we write it once. And 5 appears once. So we write it once. Then we multiply these numbers together. We have 4 times 15, that is 60. So 60 is our lowest common denominator. Okay, so this is a sure method of finding the lowest common denominator. Prime factorize all the denominators and then write down the most number of times that each factor appears in any one of the factorizations. You're not totaling them up. So I'm not adding 1, 2, 3, 4 times for the 2. It appears at most twice in any one of the factorizations, so I only write it twice. So now you can see we take the lowest common denominator and multiply it by each of the 4 terms we see here. Here's the equal sign. And this is the lowest common denominator. 4 goes into 60 15 times. 5 goes into 60 12 times. 60 divided by 5 is 12. And these zeros cancel because both of these divide by 10. 60 divided by 10 is just 6. And 12 goes into 60 5 times. So now we have 15x is our first term. That's all that's left in the first term, plus 12x equals 6x plus 5. Simplify the left side by combining the like terms. 15x's plus 12x's is 27x's equals 6x plus 5. Take the 6x away from both sides. The addition property of equality, right? Using opposite operations to get rid of the 6x. We have 27x minus 6x is 21x equals 5. This is our basic equation. The last step, we apply the multiplication property of equality. 21 divided by 21 undoes multiplication by 21. But whatever you do to one side of the equation, to keep the scales balanced, you must do to the other side. So now we have as our answer x equals 5 over 21. Be careful when applying this method of clearing fractions to an equation such as this one. It would be easy to think that these were 2 terms. But they're not two terms. This is one single term here. One single term. Why? Because this is multiplication. And a term, by definition, is a group of factors, a cluster of factors, separated from another term by addition or subtraction. So this is a group of factors here. Okay? So, the lowest common denominator, we look at the denominators 5, 1, and 1, is obviously 5, because 5 goes into itself evenly and 1 goes into 5 evenly. So our LCD is 5. And since we have one term on either side, we multiply this side by 5. And actually, you can just multiply like this. I'm going to multiply this by 5. And I'm going to multiply this by 5. Okay. What's this? And, oops, these 5's cancel, and we have minus 2 times 10 is minus 20. Got my R here, right? There was an R there. So the R is still here. These 5's canceled. Remember, you don't want to distribute because we don't have a plus sign here. Okay, we're just going 5 times minus 2/5 times 10. We're multiplying this whole cluster, this whole term that's on the left side by 5, which is the lowest common denominator. And over here on the right side, 5 times minus 4 is minus 20R as well. Now, if you recall from page 705 in your text, example 6, whenever we have a situation where both sides of the equation look exactly the same, then we know that the solution is all real numbers. Think about it. Any value we put in for r would make this equation true. If r is 1, we have minus 20 equals minus 20. If r is 2, we have minus 40 equals minus 40. If r is 4, we have minus 80 equals minus 80, and so on. No matter what real number we replace r with, and since r is the same letter, we always replace it with the same number. When the letters are the same, they represent the same number. Okay? And no matter what we replace r with, what number we replace it with, this equation is always true. So all real numbers satisfy this equation.